All right, thank you so much for joining us today. Today we're actually going to be re-recording a webinar that we did last week. We're going to be talking about year-end handbook updates. And last week we put on this webinar and a lot of you showed up. Thank you so much. And we had some technical difficulties with our audio. So we wanted to make sure that everyone was actually able to hear all the material. So we will be re-recording. So thank you so much for your patience as we begin today's webinar. All right, so before we get started, I always like to start by introducing myself. My name is Adina Glincher, and I am the Senior HR Services Advisor here at PayEntry. Our training today may have a lot of information that may bring up some questions, so feel free to email our team at hrservices@payentry.com. If you don't write the email address down now, it will be on the last slide as well, so no worries. And there's no wrong question, so feel free to reach out with anything we can help you with. If you're interested in learning more about our services here at PayEntry, you can also reach out to us via that email. And then lastly, I am not an attorney, so nothing that I am telling you here today or nothing in this webinar should constitute legal advice. It is all just for informational purposes only. All right, so today we're going to be talking about employee handbooks. We're going to discuss the importance of an employee handbook, how to create a handbook, some required policies, recommended policies, policies to avoid. They may already be in your handbook, but we'll talk about why you should probably take those out. Policy updates for 2023, COVID-19 addendums, top handbook mistakes, and generally we end with a Q&A, but because this is a recorded webinar, not live, any questions we're going to ask that you email us and then we'll answer directly via our email. All right, so prior to getting started, I wanted to put this question on the board to get an idea of who our audience is today. And when we did this webinar live, I got some great participation, so I'll let you all know of those results. When should a business create a handbook? Should it be when the business reaches 15 employees? Maybe only large employers with over 50 employees need a handbook. Before you hire your first employee, no matter the size of the business, or maybe a handbook is not essential to the business. So when asked this question previously, a strong majority of you told us the answer was C, and that is correct. We did have a few people answer A and D as well, so we want to make sure that any common misconceptions are cleared up here today. It is important that every business have an employee handbook before they hire their first employee. However, with this being said, it is not too late. We are here to support you. So if you are currently a business owner or a manager and you know that your business does not have a handbook, reach out to us and we're happy to help create one for you. Ideally, the handbook should be formed before you hire that first employee, and it should establish your company's policies and procedures to help protect your business and your employees. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. So when it comes to an employee handbook, you actually don't have to have one. So I know I just spent a few minutes explaining why it's so important to have one, but the truth of the matter is you don't have to have one. It's not legally required. However, if you choose not to have one, you are still legally required to comply with state and federal law, but you just don't have the policies in writing. This can be very difficult to enforce because you don't have documented policies. So it may be hard to claim that your employees knew the policies existed or even what the laws were if you don't communicate those to them. If you choose to have an employee handbook, which we highly recommend, you are actually legally required to follow the policies written therein. So if you don't know if you're going to be able to follow the policies of your handbook, I'd rather you not have one than have one and not follow it. You must also include required policies both on a federal and a state level. So depending on which state you operate in or which states you operate in may depend on which policies need to be in that handbook. And it is highly recommended that you update your handbook annually. So we are approaching a new year. It is time to start thinking about updating your handbook again. State and federal laws are constantly changing and policies quickly become outdated. So as previously mentioned, we do not recommend this left side of the screen. Instead, we recommend you have a handbook, you put the required policies in it, you actually follow the handbook, and you update it almost every year. So why do you need an employee handbook? An employee handbook is a valuable resource. It provides employees with a resource to help understand everything they need to know regarding a company's mission, values, policies, and procedures. Not only that, but it's also a resource that they can refer back to. The purpose of a handbook is to clearly communicate expectations of employment, demonstrate an organization's culture and benefits, and inform employees of their rights. It also acts as a protection for employers. I don't know about all of you, but after reading those, I don't know why I wouldn't have a handbook. Now, to create your employee handbook, it's important that you know your company's history, practices, and culture. As your potential HR advisor, we can absolutely provide you with a template or work on some policy creation for you, but we are not living and breathing in your company every day. So it's very difficult for us to write an employee handbook without your involvement, which is why we consider this process to be very interactive. We want to know about your company. We want to know what practices and policies you are actually following so we can ensure that we have your handbook the most accurate that it can be. It's important that you identify the required policies. So as we spoke about, there are certain laws that require employers to maintain certain policies in writing, and we'll get to those in just a little bit. Include other recommended policies. So outside of those required policies, we do have recommendations we can make. Know what policies to avoid, and then create an acknowledgement form. So it's not enough just to have a handbook, but it's important that you are actually distributing it to your employees and requesting that they acknowledge the fact that they received it, understand it, and are going to follow it. So let's get into some required policies. Most of you are probably in an at-will state. At-will employment generally means that either party is free to terminate the employment relationship at any time for any lawful reason. It's important that that is stated in your employee handbook. You also must have an EEO statement and non-harassment policy in your handbook. Not only will this allow employers to reduce their exposure to liability for certain forms of harassment, but it also provides your employees with the information necessary to file a complaint if necessary, and it just lets them know that this is on your radar and you have their back when it comes to creating a not harassment-free workplace. A disability accommodation policy is legally required to be in your handbook. It should outline the procedure for requesting a workplace accommodation. And some states actually have a broader definition of disability, so it's important that you know what state you operate in and what their requirements are as well. Next, the religious accommodation policy. Ensure that your policies explain how employees should express their need for a religious accommodation, who they should go to and how to go about requesting that. In addition, there must be an accommodation for nursing mothers policy in your handbook. It is required by federal law. With this policy, it is important to note that some states require even greater protection. So once again, figure out what your state requires. You must provide reasonable break times for 1 year after the child's birth, and provide a place other than a restroom shielded from view and free from intrusion. But as mentioned, your state may have even more requirements. You also must have an attendance policy in your handbook. Ensure that attendance policies are actually applied, that they're applied equally, and that they set clear expectations. When it comes to pay, timekeeping, meal and rest periods, and overtime, describe how and when your employees will be paid, the methods for recording time worked accurately, any deductions to their paycheck, including federal and state taxes, and then also explain meal and rest periods. Every company may have different requirements when it comes to this, and some states have their own requirements as well. So outline your expectations, and then include your overtime law depending on the state you operate in. In addition to all the policies I just mentioned, There are also some federal and state leaves that legally need to be included in your handbook. This includes FMLA and military leave. One common question we get is, do I need to have an FMLA policy in my handbook if I'm not an FMLA qualifying employer, meaning I don't meet the qualifications of having 50 or more employees within a 75-mile radius? The answer is no. This is only if you actually are required to offer FMLA. And then some examples of leaves that vary by state include state paid family leaves, paid sick leaves, witness leaves, victim leaves, domestic and sexual violence leaves, emergency responder leaves, voting leaves, and public health emergency leaves as well. Now, we just spoke about all the policies that you legally have to have in your handbook. So if you're missing any of those, reach out to us. Let us create a handbook for you that is compliant both federally and within your state. The following policies are all policies we actually recommend you have in addition to the ones previously listed, and we'll explain why. The first is employment of relatives and friends. And clearly I felt this one was important because I put it down twice. Where an employer makes the decision to hire friends and or family members, the employer should also have a policy outlining how it will handle any conflicts of interest. So if you're going to be hiring family or friends, it's important that you are identifying how you're going to handle when there may be issues that arise in doing so. There should also be a new hire and introductory period policy. An introductory period is a set amount of time, usually 90 days, where an employee is getting to know the company. Generally, within this introductory period, the employee may not qualify for benefits as well. This policy will outline the expectations of this time period and notify employees that performance will be monitored. Next, we have performance, discipline, and termination policies. So it's important that you incorporate standards of conduct so your employees know how to act, your disciplinary action policies and practices. Maybe you follow, and hopefully you follow, a progressive discipline policy, conflicts of interest, and performance management policies as well. Outline expectations for when an employee chooses to resign. And we use the word expectations, not requirements, because we can't require an employee give us notice, but we can absolutely ask that that occur and make that an expectation of your employees. It should include notice, final pay, and return of company equipment requirements as well. Next on our list of recommended policies, we have employment classifications. It is important that you clearly define employment classifications, such as full-time, part-time, exempt, or non-exempt. Classifications can dictate eligibility for benefits and overtime pay. If any of these classifications are foreign to you, or maybe you have other classifications not listed and you want us to give you our opinion on those or look into those, definitely reach out to us. We did an entire classification webinar that you can see on our page, or you can reach out to us and we can have those conversations with you directly. One other thing I want to mention at this point is if you would like a copy of the slides for this presentation, you can reach out to us at our hrservices@payandtree.com email address, and we can send you over a copy of the slides for the presentation. All right, now to keep going. The next thing we recommend you have in your handbook is an explanation of your time off benefits. Address your company rules and procedures related to holidays and vacations. Who's eligible, what amount of leave are they going to have, or accrual, carryover, and procedures for requesting time off. And lastly, you should touch on your benefits. So provide a general overview of the benefits you offer in terms of health insurance, dental, vision, 401k, etc. It's important that you don't dig too into these benefits in your handbook. For one, handbooks are long as is, so when you include all the details, it's going to make it even lengthier. But two, there are other resources, I should say, your employees can gather this information, including their summary plan descriptions. So just a brief overview would be great. And then additional requirements for a handbook. You should have an explanation of the handbook. And although that sounds silly, it is important that you clearly explain that the handbook is a handbook. What do we mean by that? we mean that it is not a contract of employment. It is simply a policy manual. You should have a right to modify the handbook policy that clearly states that employers can revise, rescind, or modify the handbook at any time without notice, and acknowledgement of receipt. The acknowledgement should include a statement that the employee not only read but understood the content of the handbook as well. Here at PayEntry, we have a hiring and onboarding system that allows you to easily upload your handbook and send it out to your employees and gain an electronic acknowledgement that is available to our payroll clients. So if you're interested in doing this electronically or through our systems, reach out to us. Your HR professional can help set that up for you in your hiring and onboarding system. Now, let's talk about some policies to avoid. And I don't want everyone to see these policies and immediately freak out. These are very commonly seen in handbooks, but we do want to let you know why these should likely be removed from your handbook. First and foremost, dress codes that prohibit specific hairstyles or religious pieces. This seems pretty self-explanatory, but let's dig into this a little bit. Most states and federal law actually require that you don't discriminate against employees based on religion. And many states have the Crown Act, which includes hairstyles in that anti-discrimination policy. So make sure that you're not prohibiting employees from wearing certain items or having certain hairstyles that correlate with their religion or their religious beliefs, as doing so may be looked at as discrimination. Withholding final pay until company property is returned. We see this one often. Many employers reach out to us and say to us, hey, we have an employee we terminated and they're not giving us our laptop back or our cell phone back, maybe our tools. So we're going to go ahead and hold their pay until we get that back. That's actually illegal. So you do not want to have that practice or advertise that practice in writing in your handbook. Unauthorized overtime will not be paid. So we get a lot of questions on this one too. So let's dig into this a little bit. As an employer, you absolutely have the right to state that overtime must be previously authorized. So you can't have unauthorized overtime. However, there are likely going to be times, depending on your industry, where you have an employee who works overtime. And it can be because, and maybe they didn't have the opportunity to get it authorized. Maybe it was a last minute thing and their manager asked them to stay late. You legally need to pay your employee for the overtime, regardless of your policy that they need to have pre-authorized overtime. Now, because working overtime without having permission prior to do so is a violation of your policy, you can absolutely have a conversation with your employee about violating the policy and engage in disciplinary action. But you cannot choose, or you can do whatever you want. We would never recommend that you withhold pay or you refuse to pay them overtime, as doing so will be a violation of the law. Requiring a doctor's note for every sick day. We put this one in here because most states, many states have paid sick leave policies that state, look, you can't really question an employee for usage of their sick leave. They get X amount of days. It is what it is. Now, anything beyond that, you can request a doctor's note for. So if you're in a state that has a paid sick leave requirement, then that's where this is coming from. If you're in a state that does not have a paid sick leave requirement, it also may be a best practice to not require a doctor's note for every sick day. People get sick, it's going to happen, and not everyone will always go to the doctor the first day they get sick. So definitely come up with a number, either based on your state law or just based on your company policy, where you allow your employees to use sick time without requiring proof that they went to a doctor, and then a number maybe past 3 days or 4 days where you would start requiring a doctor's note. And then prohibiting lawful off-duty conduct. We did get a question on this as well during the live webinar. What we mean by this is that if, for example, marijuana is legal in your state, you cannot require, you should not require employees do not smoke marijuana or use marijuana outside of work, because it is a lawful conduct. It is lawful conduct in your state, and we can't tell our employees what to do and what not to do outside of work. And then any language that implies job security should be avoided and taken out of your handbook. And that may be any promises to continue employment or any verbiage that may be misconstrued as a promise, such as, you know, once you reach your second year of employment, yada, yada, yada. It's important that we're not guaranteeing that everyone's going to be there for that long. And then pre-employment practices just don't need to be in the handbook. Handbook should be given to your employees, not your candidates. So they don't need to be aware of your pre-employment practices. All right. So now that we got through all the policies to avoid, we are now on the slide you have all been waiting for, policy updates for 2023. Now, this is not an all-inclusive list. There are many updates that are continuing to come out and that did not make this list, but we wanted to give you a good start on what to be looking for. In addition, our next two webinars, one's going to be on, the first one will be on December 8th, and the next one will be on December 15th. Oops, my apologies. There we go. Are going to be addressing the new laws in the new year. So definitely join us for those if you want to know more about updates to be aware of. All right. First and foremost, equal employment opportunity. Make sure that you are updating your EEO policies and procedures for each state where you have employees, and ensure that they are up to date and include relevant protected classes. There have been many updates in this category. DEI and the Crown Act. I mentioned the Crown Act a little bit earlier on. 18 states have their own Crown Act, which protects employees with natural hairstyles from discrimination. Create or update specific policies, including grooming and dress code policies, and ensure they align with state and federal regulation updates. Whoops. All right, next we have family and medical leave laws. 11 states have enacted their own family and medical leave laws that can be paid through a state-run disability program. Make sure if you are in a state that had a recent update that you are including that in your handbook. And then Colorado, New Hampshire, and Oregon have all adopted paid leave programs that will begin in 2023. Equal pay and wage discrimination. Remove any policies that prevent employees from discussing their pay information. You legally have to allow this, so make sure that your handbook verbiage does not go against the law. And then substance use in testing. So state laws include anti-relation provisions, so you'll want to make sure your drug and alcohol policy does not contradict medicinal or recreational marijuana laws. All right, so now that we've gotten through some of the updates to look forward to in 2023, COVID-19 is still very real and still very much a topic we need to be discussing. So make sure that you are reviewing your COVID-19 policies and remove any policies that are no longer in effect. COVID-19 policies are constantly changing, and it is recommended that employers keep these policies in a separate addendum to the handbook because of the constant changes. So ensure that you don't have anything in your handbook about FFCRA as it has expired, so that federal leave law should no longer be in your handbook. And then depending on where your employees are located, check your state leave laws for any extensions and information that needs to be added. Make sure you include remote and hybrid work policies and include language that indicates that remote workers must notify you if they relocate to a different state. Now this, we tend to get a lot of questions on this as well, because yes, your employees have the right to move, but it's important that you know where they are working from for tax purposes. So make sure that you have some kind of policy where this needs to be told to you. And then vaccination policies are also important to be aware of. States like New York have extended their vaccination leave laws until December 31st. So make sure that your policies reflect any extensions. All right, let's review some of the top handbook mistakes. And many of these we spoke about already throughout the presentation. First and foremost, policies not matching company practice. This one is huge. If you're going to have a handbook, we know that you legally need to follow it. So if your practices differ than your handbook states, it's important that we update your handbook to match your actual practices. Failing to train managers and supervisors. So Although it would be lovely to assume that all our managers are going to read the handbook from front to back and be able to answer any questions, that's generally not the case. So make sure that you train your managers and supervisors on the handbook policies so that they can adhere to them and that they can help their employees adhere to them as well. Make sure that you don't have restrictive social media policies because employees have the right to do lawful things outside of work. People who don't revise their handbook regularly, that's a huge mistake. Many clients or many handbooks we get asked to review haven't been updated since 2012, some since 2017, and all of those are outdated. There have been so many updates in the last couple years that it's important you get that handbook updated. Failing to include required policies is, of course, a mistake. We want those in there. Having a one-size-fits-all approach. So I know I referred to a handbook template that we utilize, and we do utilize a template, but we customize it based on your company background, history, values, mission, etc. We also make sure that if you have industry-specific verbiage you would like in your handbook that you provide to us, that we put it in there. So not one handbook will fit for every employer. Make sure that you don't have overly detailed discipline procedures. So it's important that your employees know who to go to if they have complaints. And it's important that they know that, if they break a policy or violate a policy, I should say, that there may be disciplinary action and an idea of what that disciplinary action may look like. But we don't want to put such specific details in our handbook that we are not going to be able to follow it. So we don't want to state that every time an employee is late by 15 minutes more than twice a month, they're going to have a written warning or something of that sort, because it may not be realistic to follow that. And there may be case-by-case situations that cause you to have to kind of reevaluate how you approach things. So don't be too overly detailed in your handbook. Don't omit at-will statements and disclaimers. Don't just use a standard handbook template. You are a unique business in a unique state, so it's important that you have the right handbook for your state and your business. And then failing to distribute the handbook and not collecting employee acknowledgements is a big mistake too. Not only are you required to follow your handbook if you have one, but you're also required to notify your employees of the handbook and ensure that they can access it. All right, so we went over quite a bit of information in the webinar today, and thank you all for watching. As always, we are here to help. So we don't like to just throw a bunch of information at you and then walk away. We want to assist you. Our HR professionals here at PayEntry can help you update and create employee handbooks and company policies. We can do a compliance audit with you, which actually allows us to come in, ask you a bunch of questions, get a feel for your current practices, and let you know where your risk may lie and make recommendations as to what things you should work on from an HR standpoint and how we can best assist you. We can help you keep up with changing state and federal laws, as that's happening a lot right now at the end of the year, and assist you with day-to-day HR best practices, forms, policies, employee relations, and more. Our HR services compliance package also includes a learning management system, which has a lot of employee and manager trainings, which includes state compliant harassment prevention training. So if you are going elsewhere for your harassment prevention training, let us help you. Let's add that into your bundle, as well as all these broad array of trainings included in the learning management system as well. And in addition, we do offer a la carte trainings too. So if you have a unique need, maybe you want us to roll out a handbook for you. So not only create it, but also really highlight the differences from your old handbook and explain it to your employees via Microsoft Teams or Zoom, we can do that. So we offer a la carte services too, where we can bill specifically for that project or that training. So if you have a question, ask us, and we're happy to assist you in any way that we can. All right, as mentioned previously, we're not going to go into any specific questions due to the nature of this webinar, but please do not hesitate to email us at hrservices@payentry.com. We look forward to seeing you on December 8th for our New Year, New Law Part 1 webinar. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.